So, what if the key to breaking free from the status quo wasn't more effort or seriousness, but more laughter? What if comedy could be your secret weapon for leadership, resilience, and living a life unapologetically true to yourself? I'm Stacey Luces, and this is Beyond the Quo, where we challenge limits, redefine success, and explore bold, authentic living. Today's guest is Sam Ghanem. She is the strategic CEO of SG Inc., co-founder of Let's Go 180, and I'll let you explain what that is later, and an unapologetic advocate for living fully. With 23 years of print manufacturing experience, Sam has mastered the art of clarity in messaging and life. She's also an inspiring stand-up comedian who believes that laughter is a superpower that helps us lead authentically and live boldly. Sam's unique journey combines, in my opinion, and we just had breakfast, so I know so much more about you, creativity, resilience, and humor in ways that really redefine what it means to lead and thrive. I won't say midlife because she's super, super younger than I am, but definitely for those of you, I feel like it's a nice strategy. So I want to start off, well, welcome, Sam. Let me say that first.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Excited to have you. All right, so I'm going to start with this, right? If your life was a stand-up set, what's the one punchline that perfectly sums up how you've approached breaking the status quo?
I would say that it's something in the way of a punch that starts with how I used to be in the season of yes and asking no questions, and now I'm in the season of maybe and asking all the questions. It's not so much a punch so much without setting it up, but the truth of the matter is, let's put it this way. Once upon a time, I identified as being Lesbanese, and now I'm in the season of maybe.
I love that so much. We need like shirts.
I know a printer.
We need a oh yeah, good segue. Good segue. Oh my goodness. That is so let's talk about that a little bit. Let's unpack that a little bit, because a lot of the times I feel, and we talk about this, I've talked about this in other episodes, but I feel like, and you have sisters, twins that are my age, so you understand this midlife rub, right? But tell me about, because some people are like, okay, I say yes to all the things because, you know, what are they going to think of me if I say no? And I feel like what we're really talking about is boundaries and kind of this innate sense of self-autonomy and sovereignty around what I say yes to and what I say no to, and being okay if other people are having their own moments about how you show up. But what does it mean to you, like saying maybe now? Like, what is that?
Well, I think I can answer it in the reverse. So I used to misunderstand what season of yes meant, because I used to think yes sounds so optimistic and positive and forward thinking, and no sounds so negative. It has a connotation that's otherwise, adverse. So I got to the point where I did what many of us do, and I said yes to all the things, and I lived in burnout. I didn't even know the difference, because I'm almost 41, and I can tell you with total certainty 38 of my years were lived in burnout. Yeah. I think I was born in burnout. I think I was a product of burnout, and then it just continued, right? So I am completely crystal clear now on when we take total control over the rooms we're in, then there's not really a risk to saying yes, because everything in that room has the nice, positive, uplifting, forward-thinking association to the word yes. With every yes we say no to something. So we have the absolute responsibility to understand the difference. When we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. Today, I'm in the season of maybe, because maybe everything is possible. Maybe there's not really a no, because the truth is, if you say it's possible, you're right. And if you say it's not, you're right. Right?
I feel like there's also a season of not right now.
Right.
And for me, my kids are much, much older now. And I led a workshop last week with women that their children, and there were some that didn't have children, nor did they ever want to. But there's also the season of I want it now. The upward mobility, right? So there were lawyers in the room, a couple of founders for nonprofits. We had the ex-mayor of one of our cities, and they're all in this season of different wants around achievement and personal development. And somebody's kid was like a year and a half, and somebody had like teens, and somebody had like somebody off to college. And it struck me, and it's probably an unpopular opinion, but I'll be happy to, I would love your perspective on this. For me, I can have it all, but maybe just not right now. And I think for me, that's where a lot of my confidence really took off in the last couple of years, because I understood at what point I would inject the necessary effort, resources, time, commitment to get to the goal I wanted. And maybe it just couldn't be now if my dad was going through a health issue, or even myself. But before, it would feel like I was failing at something if I couldn't get it all done now. What are your thoughts kind of on that? And I know the work that you do also around 180, like coaching and workshops and stuff.
I would say that previously, I'm typically kind of more of an extreme person. And I used to resent the statement because you think like it's like everything's go hard. Where I am today is I'm extremely passionate and extremely loving, and I'm 150% in when I'm in. That said, now that I know the timing may not be right now, but you can sprinkle in a little of all the things. You can work on all of the things.
Yeah.
You can be present with all of them, and they can all get some kind of TLC. Before, when I would say no and I think it's not right now, I'd feel so much defeat or disappointment. I'd feel like I'm saying no and I'm basically removing the possibility. Today I know that I get to program in whatever is important to me, and that by setting SMART goals, measurable, slightly stretchy, setting myself up for success, accountability partners, being in the room with people who are going to help me, even if they don't realize. One little conversation,
For sure.
the 1% better every day, but from the perspective of, if I spend a little time nurturing this thing, right? It's like talking to your plants for 2 minutes or so every day, like just a little TLC.
Yeah.
It used to be when I would say no, it meant like no, so it didn't get any attention.
It was like an inferno, like you dropped it,
just done.
Yeah.
And then I would cut it out of my, dreams or hopes or aspirations or even goals.
And those no's, I feel, come from a place of deep resentment.
Yep.
That people are impinging on your time or energy, and you just don't have no more to give. And it's like, no, boom, done.
Right.
From a place of, oh, leave me alone.
Or it's displaced. So now that I've taken complete responsibility and accountability for the yeses and the nos, when I'm crystal clear there, then I run very minimal risk on saying no or yes to the wrong thing. And even the word boundary I used to resent, because it used to be fueled by the hard no, the harshness of a boundary. And typically, I mean, it's not a shock, this comes from childhood, culture, nature, nurture, all of our outside influences, and the belief systems that were embedded, right?
Yeah.
So you think, oh, I can't say no, they're my elder, or I can't say no, it's my mom, or I can't, right? And then you recognize, no, it's like punched, the no, and it's very heavy and harsh. But if I know in my knowing that I'm nurturing and sprinkling all of the things that I really want for myself, the amount of actual time that is left, I can say to my mom, okay, Mom, so we have this amount of time. So do you want to do this thing or that thing? And you almost like walk the person into the boundary yourself versus, harshly going, nope, not for me. I'm not doing the thing. And it's like upset.
It's like, so two things come to mind. I think when a lot of us hear the word boundary, we think that this is what I will allow others to do to me, right? So my boundary is, if you are rude to me, I am not going to talk to you again. Or if you turn up late, it means you're disrespecting my time. Do you know what I mean? Like, we create a lot of these rules around how people are supposed
Others.
to, right? And if you internalize and say, what are my boundaries for myself? I value punctuality, as an example. And so I'm going to say that is my, especially if you're a leader, hey guys, if you are more than a minute late, we're going to ask you to quietly enter, and we're not going to recap. We're not going to recap what we just talked about, because there were some people here that were on time, and things happen. There's going to be a replay after or something. But I think to just be like, no, we're going to give it another 5 minutes, or we're going to give it another 2 minutes. People see that as being really kind and accommodating. But meanwhile, you're seething a little bit, because now it's pushed your entire day backward, like whatever. That's just an example. But I think for me, a defining moment in my career and my personal life was, what are my boundaries with myself? What am I willing to accept? Less so, what am I willing to allow people to do to me? Because that takes away my power. And the other example I had was, you talk about these tiny little shifts and these tiny little movements, even if you're not making the gigantic, leaps and bounds you want to. I'll ask you a question. Do you know who Michael Phelps is?
Yeah.
Do you know who the guy that came second is?
No.
In a particular race that Michael Phelps won, he beat this guy by 2 millimeters. Barely a fingertip. And that was the difference between anybody you ask knowing who Michael Phelps is and the second guy. And so I say that to say 2 millimeters is sometimes all it takes to make the difference. And so one of the micro movements I think that we can all aspire to is, what are those tiny little shifts I can make today that really set me up, maybe even next year, to be better?
Right. For me, so I got to a point not that long ago where it felt like we didn't have a boundary. We, as in me within myself, people in my life. So being a person who's typically extreme, again, like action-packed punch, like suddenly all the yeses were nos, like get out of my space. It was very resentful. There was a lot of shame attached to it and burnout, and just I was upset. And I started to realize, why does this thing bother me, whatever the thing is? Like if someone disrespects my time, why does it bother me? Oh, because Sam, once upon a time, meaning then, you were disrespecting your time. You weren't prioritizing you. So when people didn't prioritize you, it hit you twice. And then it got clear, like, if I have a set of expectations from others, this is 80-20, by the way, because we're not perfect. So on the 80-20,
For sure.
I get to hold myself accountable from a loving place to show up for myself the way that I anticipate or would like for others to. And also releasing the expectation. I don't mean having no expectations of others in the sense of, like the example you just gave. What I mean is not being married to the outcome of the expectation, because I'm going to show up no matter what, the way that I am. And it's not...
Release the outcome.
Yeah, the attachment to the outcome and the attachment to the external. It became imperative for me because, in all honesty, I was doing anything but living my life. I was simply existing for a very long time.
I think what made me also love the name for this podcast, Status Quo, seems like, nothing's really wrong with status quo sometimes. It can be a comfortable life, right? It can be a great life, an average life. Nothing is wrong with that. And so I think that within a percent of the population, status quo isn't enough. And within that same percent, there's another percent that's like, I want to do something, but I don't know what that is. And so when we talk about going beyond this quo, right, beyond the status quo, whether it feels intimidating or exciting, or again, up to your personal experiences, how that's going to feel, right? Like your tolerance for risk, your tolerance for new things, your change, all of that stuff. But stepping outside some of these boundaries and having more clarity around who you are and what you want is the first pillar and the hardest. And it's also, and I always reinforce this with myself, because there are some mornings when I have to go back to the pillar and start. It feels like start from scratch. And I think people think that once you are at a certain point, it becomes easier. And I would argue it becomes easier sometimes, but a lot of it is just every day literally is a new beginning. And sometimes the beginning means you're triggered or it's not going the way you want and you have to go back to your basics. What would you consider like 2 or 3 basics for you if that happened? Like you're doing all this work, you're getting better at knowing what you want and how you show up in the world and serving others. But there has to be times when you're just like, is it even fucking worth it at this point? Am I going to get better?
Right. The first thing I'd say is embrace that you're always a student. So I don't mean I don't care, but it doesn't matter to me. If you're 1 year in, 10 years in, 100 years in, if you don't know any different, you're always a student because life keeps lifing. That's the one thing we can guarantee.
It's another shirt.
Right? I'm going to be very busy printing.
Keeps lifing.
Life keeps lifing. And no one's exempt. There's no demographic that's exempt. There's no socioeconomic category. There's no culture. Nobody's exempt from life.
Yeah, you don't get a fast pass.
Right. That said, every day we wake up above ground, we're lucky. We're blessed. And truly, and I, again, 80-20, journaling has become like if nothing goes right in the day, the journaling for me, and I like a prompting journal. I'm actually using a journal now. It's called Better Every Day. I needed to reintroduce pen to paper. We live in a tech world. I own a strategic printing company. There's a lot of technology. We teach, students and clients virtually. There's a lot of tech. And for me, being, all of it, podcasts, you name it, I needed to reintroduce pen to paper.
Yeah.
And I love the journal prompts because in some days they're just light and airy, and some days they're really deep.
Yeah.
And then I love that there's categories, happiness categories, presence categories, and I don't go forward. So every day's a surprise. So journaling for me is a really incredible way for me to get right back into me, and just, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. That said, walks, I walk to the degree that my neighbors ask if I own a car.
Right.
I'm dead serious.
Yeah, like a nomad.
Yep. And Brooks loves me because I run through their sneakers. And I had to introduce walking, not running or lifting weights in the morning, because ease is not natural to me.
Oh my gosh. I feel that in my soul.
Right?
Yeah.
I wake up at a 12. I feel like my knees don't bend. I get out of bed, I'm standing straight up. I'm like, let's go. So introducing ease in the morning has been a literal, no exaggeration, lifesaver.
Yeah. I want to add a word to ease, tenderness. And I feel like some of these words make us vomit a little bit inside because you're like, who the fuck has time to be joy, tender, gentle, ease, reintroducing some of these into our DNA is powerful stuff because it can't always be hard hustle, right? We a lot of people are like using the words, trauma or trigger. Like we've incorporated a lot of those into our normal day-to-day lexicon, but also our normal day-to-day acceptance of what's normal. And I think reintroducing, I'm going to have an easy day today, right? Last week, I understood I was going really fast. I felt it in the things I was neglecting, right? I hadn't gone to work out. I hadn't walked. I hadn't done the things that I committed to for myself. And I felt it. Like I could feel that disconnect from what was important. And it showed up. It showed up and I was talking quicker. I was late for meetings. I felt hassled, right? I was driving my car and I didn't even have time to put gas. I was like, well, it says 48 miles. And do you know what I mean? It's stupid things. But I was like, you know what? Friday, I'm going to have an easy day. And I rescheduled some meetings. I got up a little bit later. I did a leisurely, gentle yoga class. Like I created an easy day. And it still felt, there's a niggling part of me that's like, gosh, but you have to do this and you have to do that. And oh my God, it's Thanksgiving. And how do you incorporate ease with not only yourself, but like the people around you?
So the way that I make it so that there's ease, which for me isn't synonymous necessarily with easy, but it would be much more like flow.
Yeah, flow
By
is
the way,
amazing.
I have dubbed TLE, tender, loving ease, into this conversation. For me, in order to show up with more flow and ease for others, I have to show up for myself, and I'm being sincere. There's not a single day I don't walk. I start every day with a 5K. If there's days like this morning that my morning was a bit behind, I did a mile and I'll do a couple later, and they're walks. I'll lift 2 or 3 times a week and do other things, but I want to constantly remind myself that it's not only possible, it's attainable to invite ease into your life, and it starts with me. So,
and it's essential.
Right.
I think a lot of times we think these things are optional, and it doesn't have to be a walk or journaling. I think, and that's the takeaway was for me is what can I extrapolate from what everybody else is doing that works for them so powerfully to fit into the way I live and the way that I exist so that it does make an impact, right? What are the things I can try?
Right.
Nobody's saying, oh, go do the same exact recipe, right?
Right. And for me, there's a third. And ironically enough, you say last week, and last week I'm going to admit I ignored it. I have an alarm in my phone. There's two. One of them says be here now at 3 times in the day, 9:30, 12:30, and 5:15. I chose those times, and it's part of our practice in Let's Go 180. I don't necessarily struggle with presence out here. I struggle with presence in here. And so if I'm up at 5:30, by about 9:30, I need a reminder. Around lunch, I need a reminder to eat because I'll intermittent fast. And next thing I know, it's like 3 o'clock and I'm a little hangry. I suffer from hangriness.
Yes.
And then around 5:15, because as solopreneurs, as rainmakers and difference makers in our own lives, what is 9 to 5? That doesn't exist. So by 5:15, I'm like, oh, do what the others are doing and just pause. And so the be here now alarms are my pauses. And I used to just look at the alarm and breathe. Yeah. Now I sit. So I'll take 10. I'll literally take 10. And to keep myself accountable, let's say I'm texting with someone, I'll say I'm going to take 10. Because if I say I'm doing it, I'm doing it. So that way you don't think I'm ignoring you. We don't, you know, that kind of thing. Or if my team's on Slack, I'll say I'm taking 10. And I'll take 10.
Yeah.
Like you can take 10.
Set the tone. And I think it also, not that we need permission, but it gives other people permission to take their own 10.
Right.
And there's so much glorified shit around hustle culture and this I'm so busy genre. Now, I want to talk about, you know, something that really struck me. You shared that you left home when you were 14 and that comedy played a huge role in shaping your life. I want you to, if you can, take us back to that time and share how humor became not just survival, right, but a way to use it for clarity and growth.
So from as far back as I can remember, my family's Lebanese. I'm first generation born American, and we were a funny household. Well, what's not funny? 6 immigrants in a house, some from Africa, some from Lebanon, beautiful culture. We congregate in the kitchen, and we were the hosting house. So there was constant energy, bodies, like, P.S. you were never alone, and nobody took 10, and nobody paused, right? But there was this beautiful energy in the home, and as a result, culturally speaking, there's a lot of entertainment. There's music, there's food, there's arts, right? And unfortunately, there was also a contrast because my upbringing was very abusive. So on the one hand, there's darkness, and on the other hand, there's what's seen as light because it's fun and it's light and it's, you know, again, entertaining. We were like the catch-all home. Family would come visit. They'd stay with us. There was a constant transient kind of feel to visitors. And on one hand, it was beautiful because you had this energy. And on the other hand, you kind of felt like you had to hide because you don't show those parts of you to guests or visitors.
Sure.
And so I'd find myself, specifically Robin Williams and George Carlin, like watching movies on repeat. I've watched Mrs. Doubtfire. I'm not exaggerating. Probably 75 times. I saw the Broadway musical 4 times in the same week. I don't care if I sound like a stalker because I'm okay with it. I embrace it. And I think that Robin Williams is like my uncle.
I think you can say passionate about that.
I'm both. Yeah. I'm a little okay with both.
A little stalkish.
I'm cool. We're fine with it. So Robin Williams, George Carlin, and Archie Bunker in the background of my life, the Pink Panther. Separate of this, my great uncle actually did save my life. I left home at 14 years old and I lived with him and my aunt. They are amazing. My uncle's still with us, but just in a different form. And I believe he's with me every day. And they were funny. And they were funny like at the craziest shit. You're like, no, that really did happen and it's pretty gnarly. And you're laughing. And I think like, wow, we can talk about it. We don't have to hide it. We don't have to shove it or we don't have to medicate it. Fast forward, a lot of these parts of me kind of sat dormant. And growing up, multiple jobs, educated. I'm the first college graduate in my family. I got my master's at Nova, business owner, a couple businesses, all this busyness. And that part of me just kind of sat in the corner to the point that I forgot. And I don't mean witty, like with your friends and kind of, you know, riffing. I mean like performatively speaking. So 5 years ago, I purchased a business that plugged right into my printing company. And I met a gentleman, and we were dying laughing in our first encounter. And I don't know who he is. Fast forward, he's the owner of Sad Man Comedy Cafe, which is in this very plaza. They've been there for a year. He's been in comedy for 5 or 6 years, and he is like my present-day brother I never knew I needed. And he reintroduced me to comedy.
I love that.
And then he signed me up against my will to my first comedy workshop. And I kept saying, I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm not sure. I don't have time. And the truth is, I didn't know where to start, and I didn't know that you could just start where you were at and use what you had.
Yeah.
And I never could have ever understood the amount of trauma I could work through. And I literally love a mic. I love the community that's created. There are no boundaries.
Yeah.
Nothing's offensive. Nobody shows up ready to be insulted or offended. And even if it doesn't make it to the stage and you don't do a bit about it, you just get to show up. It's like going to therapy with a microphone.
Yeah.
With equal parts unhinged room where nothing you say is surprising because you're about to get one-upped in your trauma game.
Yeah.
And everything's normalized because it's okay.
Yeah.
So if you leave it there, you already won.
I remember seeing George Lopez, and I love Trevor Noah. And it's irreverent, but it's also you're busting your gut. But it's those truth kernels and that shared lived experience and life experience that you're able to release, because the people that laugh the hardest, they get it, right?
Right.
And I think that's why movies also, any sort of expression of emotion. And I didn't really think about comedy in a way until you kind of wrote some of this, in the sense of it is a way to express and grow through and get to the next level.
For sure.
Yeah.
For me, it's also a metric. It's a measure of how far removed I am or I'm not from something.
I love that.
So I've done traditional forms of therapy. I actually still see a therapist once a week, and I absolutely love her. She's introduced me to a variety of practices. That, paired with the coaching that I went through as a student, and then Let's Go 180 with Janelle Kelly was born, which we can talk about. All of these things were but a bunch of small things pieced together. And comedy has played a significant role in my public speaking and how I show up and how I inexcusably and unapologetically can speak very candidly and feel totally whole in doing so. And I think, and thank you, because I believe for any one of us, not only are we all literally superheroes in our own right, everything doesn't have to be huge.
Yeah.
If your greatest achievement is making it from your bed to the couch or washing your hair, that's okay.
Yeah.
And you're actually allowed to have fun while doing it. They don't seem like they're big wins, but they are. And if I could say this, oftentimes we look at the funniest people in the room like the class clown, and they're looked at as the most, broken, because what do? We want to distract. And if I make you laugh or I make fun of myself first, then it doesn't hurt me if you do. Well, I aspire to break the stigma, and I would love to be the most healed person in the room making people laugh. But what got me there is what's hilarious, because life is funny.
Yeah. I think, too, we have to some extent broaden our perception of what creates growth and leadership and what enables evolution. I think a lot of times we think of the traditional, even podcasts or coaching or workshops or seminar, or let me just get a new certification, like the very traditional kinds of, this is how I grow myself and honestly produce more and, make more money, whatever. There's always that, what's the ROI?
Right.
And I think that this generation, and my son is 14 and my daughter is 18, they are really teaching me how to just not take it so seriously, but be more creative in the pursuit of growth. And I never thought I would be one of those people that thinks about school. I'm an immigrant also. I am not even first gen. I am a straight up came here when I was 17, started from scratch. And I know for me, the blueprint was, and for a lot of the people in my circle at that time that have been successful by whatever standards we claim success is, that blueprint of education, job progression, dedicating yourself to the work, created this sense of security for us. And the metric for success was, a good house, stable marriage, like whatever your version of that is, right? That you're listening. But I think the norm now is so different, especially given the ways that you can earn a living. I mean, we're proving that to some extent. I stepped out of the matrix, as I call it, and I'm doing things differently. But frick, it feels so hard sometimes because you're having to relearn what your definition of success is. Tell me how, because you do quite a few things, and I want to say none of them are within the norm of what people would think you should be doing, right?
Right.
How has that set you apart? And it does. When we first met, I was like, holy shit, that's like so, all of it. How has that set you apart, but also enabled you to use it for connection?
So I can start by sharing that I did grow up stereotypically Middle Eastern Muslim, youngest of 4 girls. I should be married. I should be a mom. Somewhere in there, I could be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. I dabbled in all of those things. Literally med school, pre-law. I have a lot of student debt is what I'm trying to tell you. We haven't figured that part out yet. Fast forward, I ended up getting an international MBA at Nova, and I love language. And I speak Arabic, English, and I can teach Spanish, but my spoken language is a little insecure because I haven't used it. But I took Spanish for 12 years, and I love language. And to be funny, not funny, I love people. I'm gay for the people, as I say it. I love people. Peopling is like...
Peopling and lifing.
Peopling and lifing are like my blood type and my DNA. And sitting like this and hearing someone's story, even in small bits, to me, it's like the gas that fuels the car, truly. Not cliche. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I just love it. And there's no two snowflakes alike, right? So I inadvertently created a very different path for myself. I didn't even have a status quo for measure or a benchmark or baseline because those that can't do teach. So my family and my upbringing, none of them emulated what they wanted for me. And so I don't really know where, outside of the obvious leaving home at 14 and having to theoretically divorce these ideas, I can't go to medical school, no one's going to help me financially, my parents cut me off, all this stuff. And then I never really felt societal pressure. I probably took the other angle and rebelled against them strictly out of rebellion. And then I figured out that takes so much energy. Like if I don't feel it,
Rebel
I don't feel
with no
it.
cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, what am I like petitioning for or against? So for me, I ended up in a stereotypically male industry in print manufacturing when I was 19, and I paved the way for myself. It was trial by fire. I had to have a job. I had to work. I had no choice. But I was really, really good at it, and I'm really curious. And funny enough, engineers taught me everything I know. And then I taught them how to package it in practical purposes because they're so bright and so intelligent. And I'm like, dude.
Not practical.
Hello? Like,
Right.
Is this thing on? How do we use the thing?
Yeah.
That paired with a general desire to produce business but do business better and create business out of my love for peopling, it was a natural progression to then purchase a business. What that came with was a misrepresentation of the financials in the business that I purchased by a significant number that is very, very, very high.
Yeah.
That, in partner with COVID, which we had no knowledge of, put me in a place that I could have never expected to be. I never thought that I was going to be the statistic of an addicted personality or a suicidal personality. I never thought that I was going to be having bankruptcy conversations or losing my home, moving back in with my sister. I never thought my partner would move out of the house without telling me. I never thought I would be that person.
Yeah.
Fast forward, being in the season of yes, but being in the right room to say yes with confidence. I say yes to a course called the Culture Catalyst that came out of Stanford Masters of Business. And they taught this starting in 1979 to students in their business program. And it was how to get clear in terms of your mindset and the message that you project out. Because all the things I just mentioned to you, I called them into my life. I'm not beating myself up. There's no room for shame in my life at all. But the fact of the matter is, today, years old me knows very well the things that maybe could have been avoided and how. I don't live in any regret. I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. But I took the extremely valuable lessons out of the Culture Catalyst that, ironically enough, Janelle Kelly was my trainer, and I applied them. And when I took that, paired with the 20 years of printing experience, branding and messaging, my general education, and my burning desire to get rid of the what is the status quo? There never was one. So how can I measure a pass fail? I determine what that is. And figuring out that by no means was I going to be a statistic that is the addicted suicidal statistic. When I recognize that, depending on how you frame it, statistic doesn't have a negative connotation. I get to pick which one I want to be. And I want to be a healed one. I don't want to be an addicted one.
Yeah. And if you think about even, and I did data analytics, right? The highest levels of government. And statistics, I mean, data is such a sexy thing. I don't know, if people don't like data, then, sign off now. No, I'm kidding. To me, data is sexy because it gives you insight into patterns. And it also gives you insight into trends. And I think that you can look at the data or the patterns of your life the same way that you can use, in our case, when I work for FEMA, we use pattern and data for hurricanes, And I think for me, looking at patterns, and when you talk about journaling and you talk about conversations and you talk about the mentors in your life and the experiences in your life, I find I attract now people who have similar experiences to me without trying.
Right.
Because that's the vibration I'm giving out. And then as you change and you vibrate higher, things change. But I think that's the power of coaching and being in the right frame of mind to grow, is you recognize these patterns in yourself. And and it's powerful when you can not only change, some of the projected trajectory, but when you're like, oh no, it's repeating. Because sometimes we get back in a bad place.
Right.
Right?
I think with my experience, and ironically enough, we're all teachers and trainers in some regard, right? If we're a self-proclaimed expert or an educator in a lane, in an industry, and we work with a client of any type, whether we're employed or self-employed, we're teaching someone something. We're either teaching them the benefit, we're showing them how to use it, we're showing them the value and what their life will look like later. We're helping them identify pain points, whatever the case is. So when I recognize, like, oh, it's not so different than what I've been doing in the past, but the way that it's packaged, and I don't mean packaged to be sold, I mean packaged as in how I subscribe to it. So I thought, well, we'll never guide anybody where we've not been. And once I removed the veil, once I stopped this internal battery that I was committed to of failure, loser, shame. I mean, MPS, in my adult life, while my upbringing was what it was, none of these things were being said to me from the outside. They were all inside me. I had created a prison.
Yeah.
And nobody would have known it because I was functioning.
Yeah.
And I was functioning very high. I was winning awards,
Of course.
opening businesses, doing all the things, and building an amazing team, a team of interested parties. My network is huge, and I'm blessed. So then I thought, well, I have no right to complain because people would die for what I have.
Oh my God, that voice, that is what keeps us stuck.
Right.
Because when you compare yourself to, well, I'm not broke, I'm not, I can pay my mortgage, like that's the trap, right? That's the trap. Or my relationship isn't where it needs to be, but people have it so much worse. I feel like that's the spider's web. Yeah. I want to say I did this exercise a couple of years ago, and I pick and choose who in my coaching practice to do it with, because not everybody is kind of ready for it, which is get a couple of sheets of paper, and I'm very tactile like you. I like to write.
Right.
I don't type. I write things and feel it and retrace the word. Like that's important to me. But I tell people, For 30 minutes, I want you to play your favorite songs and uninterrupted write what's in your head, like what you say to yourself on your worst days. And after minute 15, you're going to find yourself repeating shit, whether it's you're fat or you're a loser, whatever it is. You're going to find yourself writing the same thing over and over, and you'll be tempted to be like, to give up. Keep writing. Do not let yourself off the hook for 30 minutes. And I did that, and when the 30 minutes was up, when I did it, when I had it done to me, I was in tears, 1. 2, I'm very self-contained. I think a lot of women who grew up in very sheltered homes and very religious homes, and, you be a good girl is always the thing, right? But I took those pages, and I was up to page fucking 6. And I mean, my writing at the time, towards the end of the exercise, was so big, like it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I had started very beautiful cursive.
Right.
Because we think we're going to be graded, right? That's the other freaking thing. And I took all of these pages and I flung them on the ground, which is like, I am never thrown a temper tantrum at that age, right? I was about 40. And I was crying. And the trainer at the time asked me, why? And I said, if anybody talked to anybody I loved that way, they would be out of our lives.
Right. Right.
Completely. There would be no fucking questions. There would be no do-overs. And yet that was me running in my own head. And so I think if you do that exercise, recognize that that would be an absolute hell no for anybody that you loved. And so ergo, do you love yourself?
Not that long ago, in full transparency, it was in January of this year, I had reached a point where I just couldn't life. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten extremely sick. The energetic disease was thick in my life. I mean, I was constantly sick, like every couple months every couple months just feeling terrible. But this was different. This was 104, 105 fever at 40 years old. This was irregular bleeding for 2 weeks. This was, I can't keep anything in or down.
Yeah.
It was
your body keeping score.
It was insane. And I remember, I could tell you where I was. I was standing in my apartment. Of the 28 or so days that I was in bed, 14 of them I had insomnia. And real, literally, wow. And today I know now that God was keeping me awake. And I know that for a fact. It was my divine intervention. It doesn't matter to me how it sounds. And I used to have this idea in my mind that I was such a failure and a loser, and I was a burden on my mom and my sister. And that if I wasn't here anymore, then I couldn't be a burden. And so I remember thinking, what would it look like? And like, what would they have to do? And I mean, it sounds horrific. I realize what I'm saying. On day 9 of 14 days of insomnia, I heard a voice so clear. And the voice said, you're so worried about your mom and your sister and how you're a burden on them. What if you talk to yourself like you're them? And I can tell you that since that day, my entire being.
Yeah.
And if I say that I was saved, I was saved. If I tell you, some people call it a shamanic death, and I laugh, I'm like, can we not put labels on everything? Because I'm good. But what I mean to say is, ironically enough, I was mourning a life and something did die that day. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
I believe it 100%. I mean, even when I literally flatlined, I mean, the demise was happening way before that. And everything looked fine. That's the thing. I think I tell people this story and they were like, well, you were at the pinnacle of your marriage, your health, you're right. And I think that it's important that we confess and really come clean about, we fake it quite a bit for the sake of others.
Right.
And I think that's where the surprise comes in when bad things happen. Oh, but they look so happy. Or I could never tell. Or they were so funny. If we think about you brought up Robin Williams. But I think it's important that's why I make an effort. If somebody flashes across my mind, I immediately text or call them. I don't care anymore. I call people, which is unheard of in this day and age, right? I call them or I text them. I was like, hey, you're on my mind. Is everything okay? I check in because I think a lot of times until we learn to show up for ourselves, we show up for other people.
Always.
1,000,000%.
Yeah, we program in our own distraction.
Yeah.
So I, ironically enough, am dubbed like the wellness checker. So I would check on everyone. And I actually get that from my mom. But what I figured out was I was checking on everybody but me. So we have this idea of this wellness check, and I'm like, oh, right, I get to check in on me first so I can be whole in order to show up for you. But you're unlearning, right?
Like, yeah, and it's hard. It's hard, especially culturally. And a lot of us, until we step out of our, I call it the bubble. Like I have a community, it's called, well, a lot of what I talk about is rising, and a lot of what I talk about is light. And we have a community for women of color, and it was important for me to have the woman of color in the title.
Right.
Because there are some experiences that we are unwilling to share for fear of whatever, judgment, or maybe people won't understand, or they'll think I'm overly sensitive, whatever the things are. But one of the things that comes up time and again is this propensity to not only downplay, but make light of what we're feeling or experiencing. And I think even you, thank you. I'm honored you shared that story. But I want to kind of also highlight, it took a moment and a shift in thinking for everything to change. And that was the same for me. And I think people think you have to go to Mount Himalayas or whatever and have this big transcendent eat, pray, love journey to have a different way or a different level of clarity to change the way that you live. And that's not true. It can be a conversation. It could be a poem. It could be the lyric in a song. It could be just what you said, a voice giving you a different perspective to change what's happening.
Right.
And that's power.
I think when we're tuned in, we allow for the small moments to penetrate. When we're not tuned in, and by the way, me, right? I only ever keep it here. When I wasn't tuned in, I mean, I could get hit by a bus. So the bus hit was the sickness, constant. Yeah. I would walk and trip and fall. I grew up and I was known to be clumsy. There's an energy behind all these things. Wow, yeah. And I'm always rushing. I have scars on my legs from like banging my knee or something repetitively. And it's like, what are you rushing to? And to figure out, on the one hand, I think about it and, who wouldn't listen to this and kind of feel like a pinch and it hurts to a degree. But what hurts more is ignoring it all. And know that the proverbial banging of the knee repetitively, your body is talking to you. Life is lifing, and you're getting the doorbell, the ring is off.
And the mountain drops on you.
Yeah, everything's happening.
Yeah,
like pay attention. And I think that's why it's extremely important, too, to take complete and total inventory of you and those around you. Because I'll say this, thank you, God, for that divine intervention. Thank you, God, for the sickness and the insomnia that led me to it. But thank you, God, for my village and the same mom and sister and village of people who, whether they know it or not, there were days that I just will say this, that I thought I was going to play God that day, and the phone beeped. And someone said, I'm just checking in.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful indicators at this stage in my life of success is not how much money is in my bank account. And I think that it really isn't the title. I mean, I left those things, and they're coming about to fruition in a way that I could not have imagined had I stayed. And I think even when you talk about not being in the status quo, a lot of people don't know what it means to not be in the status quo because it seems scary. And I think what we're saying is, yeah, it is, but that's your lifing. And having a community is so powerful. And, I thought about doing a lot of things to create community, and a podcast was on my list, but also it seemed like a lot of freaking work. I'm like, who the heck is going to come on and what am I going to say? But when I even your story that you just shared, and when I think about the things that have changed my life forevermore, and even in my coaching, the thing I said that changed their life, it was nothing monumental, Sam. It was a tiny little thing, a tiny little 2 millimeter, the dude who came after Michael Phelps.
Right.
It's a tiny little thing that made all the difference. And I think that's important for all of us is you don't have to be Phelps, right? But you have to make the effort. You have to make the 2 millimeter shift. And that's important.
Well, understand that you get to and you can. Because the other thing we think is that if it's not packaged perfectly, if the money isn't in excess, if you're literally not if it's not pouring out of you, then no. Like, how will you know? You don't know what you don't know. If you took the same amount of energy expenditure that you use to beat yourself up and turned even 10% of that in another direction, the exponential shift, and I'm telling you this, and some days I remember, and it's not as a ploy, it's to remind myself that I'm not that far removed, meaning life can go left or right or up or down in but a moment. And so I keep myself close to my practices. I keep myself close to my community. I keep myself extremely grounded in my businesses and with my partners. And who you have in your corner, meaning present company included, absolutely matters.
Absolutely.
And it's not a negotiable anymore. If something is hinting at you, listen. And you were born the way that you were, in perfection, with intuition, that if you think you don't have a superpower, I am here to tell you that you're so freaking wrong, because it's by design. You were born with a knowing. I don't care what your beliefs are in terms of God or the universe or any of that. You in your core have a knowing, and you get to listen to it, because nobody knows what you need better than you.
And there's this thing where we go through what we go through, and after you on the other side of what you went through, for example, you have a remedy now that is designed to help the person that is on that other side of the bridge that you were on. And I think for every one of us, whatever our hardest moments were, if you triumphed, or even if you didn't, right, there is some degree of inspiration and a lesson there that helps whomever is paying attention. But you have to pay attention first. And I talk to my kids about this all the time. They're probably sick of me saying it. Everything you have, everything you need is within you now. And the comparison trap that we get into of what am I going to need in 10 years, we don't know, because we're lifing. So let's figure things out now with an eye toward, hey, I want to get XYZ in the future, and how do I create these tiny little micro steps to get there? But the overwhelm, I think, keeps us stuck. So go small, but with a lot of heart.
And remember that your body, neurologically speaking, doesn't know the difference between anxiety and excitement.
You said that to me. You said that to me a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, true.
It doesn't.
True.
And if you say it's anxiety, you're right. And if you say it's excitement, you're right.
Yeah.
So in either case, just show up excited.
Yeah. Sam, I want to thank you for coming on and being you. And where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram, Sam W. Ghanem. For the business, think_sgink_branding. Sam at thinksgink.com, or somewhere in the community physically, only all over the place. But definitely reach out, and we'll link, obviously, my number and all that stuff too.
Yeah, we totally will. So today we explored the unexpected power of comedy in breaking the status quo. Sam's journey reminds us that leadership starts with leading ourselves, finding clarity, embracing authenticity, and daring to laugh through challenges. Whether it's letting go of perfectionism, reframing failure, or putting down metaphorical bags, this episode gave us actionable insights to redefine how we show up in the world, not only for ourselves, but for others. So in terms of practice, right, for leaders and midlifers going beyond the quo, I want to say that some lessons I took away, comedy is a reminder to do 3 things. 1, embrace vulnerability, like you just did. Share your truth, even the messy parts, because you never know, and it may make all the difference. Reframe challenges, which means finding humor in setbacks to navigate them with resilience, and staying curious. I know for me, linking comedy with healing and with leadership was such a different way for me to kind of reframe that, finding new perspectives and staying open to rethinking old patterns and beliefs. If you're ready to leave yourself first, embrace clarity, and maybe even laugh a little more along the way, I invite you to join the Beyond the Quo community. Follow us on social media, share your thoughts, and connect with others, redefining what's possible. If Sam's story resonated with you, please reach out to her. Share this episode with someone who needs a reminder that life doesn't have to always be so serious. Because as Sam showed us today so well, sometimes the best way to break boundaries is to laugh right through them. You've already done the quo. Now it's time to go beyond.